Ambassador Tailvos had served the Galactic Assembly for nearly 200 years, and in all that time he had never felt true fear. He had witnessed the fall of empires and the birth of new worlds. He had negotiated treaties between species that had warred for millennia, and he had stood in the presence of beings so ancient that their memories stretched back to when the first stars ignited in the cosmic darkness. But on this day, as he watched the emergency transmission from the Outer Rim colonies, he felt something cold wrap around his twin hearts. The Vorak had come. Every species in the galaxy knew of the Vorak Dominion. Most preferred to believe they were merely legends told to frighten young ones into obedience. They were a species born of nightmare, their bodies twisted into perfect killing machines through millions of years of evolution, their society built entirely around consumption and expansion, and their hunger was endless. The transmission showed the colony world of Palathi Prime, a peaceful planet of 6 billion souls that had never known war. The Vorak hive ships descended upon it like a swarm of locusts, their number so great that they blocked out the sun itself. Tailvos watched as the Palathi Defense Forces, equipped with the finest weapons the Assembly could provide, lasted exactly 14 minutes before being completely overwhelmed. He watched as the Vorak ground forces poured from their landing craft, endless waves of clawed warriors that felt no pain and knew no mercy. And he watched as the transmission cut to static, the final image burned into his memory being that of a Palathi child, reaching toward the camera with terror in her eyes. The Galactic Assembly convened within hours, and Tailvos took his place among the representatives of 100 species. The Great Chamber, usually filled with the gentle hum of diplomatic conversation, was silent as a tomb. High Speaker Morathkai, an ancient being whose crystalline body shimmered with barely contained emotion, addressed the assembly with a voice that trembled despite his best efforts to remain calm. "The Vorak Dominion has violated our territory," he announced. "They have destroyed a protected world and murdered billions of innocent beings, and their fleet now advances toward the inner systems at a speed that suggests they intend to continue their campaign of annihilation." Voices erupted throughout the chamber, a chaos of fear and anger and desperate pleas for action. Some demanded immediate military response, while others called for negotiation, and still others argued that the only sensible course was evacuation of all worlds in the Vorak's path. Tailvos listened to it all with growing despair. He had studied the Vorak extensively during his career, and he knew that negotiation was impossible with a species that viewed all other life forms as nothing more than food. The debate raged for hours, achieving nothing but the waste of precious time. It was then that the human delegation requested permission to speak. Tailvos turned his attention to the small group of beings seated in the far corner of the chamber. Humanity was young, their presence among the stars barely 3 centuries old, and their delegation was tiny compared to the great powers of the Assembly. Commander Daniel Price rose from his seat and walked to the central podium with a calm confidence that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. He was neither tall nor particularly impressive in appearance. A man of perhaps 40 years with gray beginning to show at his temples, and a face weathered by experiences Tailvos could only guess at. Beside him stood 2 other humans, Captain Lisa Gwen, a woman whose service record marked her as one of humanity's most decorated military officers, and Admiral Nathan Cole, whose name was spoken with reverence even by species who had never met a human. "Distinguished members of the Assembly," Commander Price began, his voice steady and clear. "We have listened to your debates with great interest, and we understand the fear that grips this chamber today." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the gathered representatives with an intensity that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The Vorak have come, and they will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will not accept tribute, and they will not be satisfied until every living thing in this galaxy has been consumed by their endless hunger. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, and High Speaker Marathkai raised a crystalline hand for silence. "What would you have us do, Commander?" the High Speaker asked. "Our combined military forces number in the thousands, while the Vorak command tens of thousands of vessels, and our soldiers are trained for peacekeeping, not for the kind of total war the Vorak wage." Commander Price smiled, and something in that expression made Tailvos's blood run cold, despite the warmth of the chamber. "We will fight them," the human said simply. Laughter erupted from several delegations, though it was the nervous laughter of beings who desperately wanted to believe that someone else would solve their problems for them. "With respect, Commander," spoke Ambassador Krelvax of the Morphean Collective, "humanity possesses perhaps 40 warships, and a military force that numbers less than the population of a single Vorak hive ship. What can you possibly hope to accomplish against such overwhelming odds?" Commander Price's smile did not waver. "Ambassador, my species has a very long history of facing overwhelming odds," he replied. "We have a saying on Earth: it is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog." He turned to address the entire assembly, and his voice rose with a passion that silenced even the most skeptical voices. "The Vorak believe they are predators, and they believe we are prey. They believe that numbers and ferocity are all that matter in war, and they believe that any species that cannot match their strength must inevitably fall before them." His eyes hardened, and for a moment Tailvos glimpsed something ancient and terrible lurking behind those human eyes. "They are wrong." Admiral Nathan Cole stepped forward, his bearing that of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this moment. "We are formally requesting command of the defensive operation," he announced. "Give us access to the Assembly's strategic reserves, grant us authority to coordinate the response, and we will show the Vorak what happens when they threaten the galaxy we have chosen to call home." High Speaker Marathkai stared at the humans for a long moment, and Tailvos could see the doubt warring with desperate hope in the ancient being's expression. "And if you fail?" the High Speaker asked quietly, flinching. "Then you will have lost nothing but a young species that was doomed anyway," he replied. "But if we succeed, you will have gained something far more valuable than victory. You will have gained the knowledge that the Vorak can be beaten." The vote was held within the hour, and though many delegations abstained out of disbelief or fear, the motion passed by a narrow margin. Humanity would lead the defense of the galaxy against the greatest threat it had ever faced. As the assembly dissolved into chaos, Tailvos found himself approaching the human delegation with a mixture of curiosity and dread that he could not explain. "Commander Price," he said, "I am Ambassador Tailvos of the Kirithan Collective, and I have been assigned as liaison to your forces. May I ask you something?" The human turned to face him, and there was a strange warmth in his eyes that seemed at odds with the cold determination Tailvos had witnessed moments before. "Of course, Ambassador." Tailvos hesitated, uncertain how to phrase the question that burned in his mind. "Do you truly believe you can win this war?" he finally asked. "Or is this merely a brave gesture meant to inspire hope in others?" Commander Price was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried an absolute certainty that sent shivers down Tailvos's spine. "Ambassador, let me tell you something about humanity," he said. "We are not the strongest species in the galaxy, and we are not the oldest or the wisest, but we have one quality that has carried us through every darkness we have ever faced." "What quality is that?" The human smile returned, and this time it was not cold, but fierce, a baring of teeth that spoke of a passion. "Predator awakened. We do not know how to surrender, Commander Price replied. "When our backs are against the wall and all hope seems lost, that is when we are most dangerous. The Vorak have made a terrible mistake, Ambassador, and we are going to teach them exactly why that mistake will be their last." Tailvas watched the humans depart, and for the first time since the transmission from Palathi Prime, he felt something other than despair. He felt the faintest stirring of hope, and beneath that hope, something else entirely. Fear. Not fear of the Vorak, but fear of what humanity might become when fully unleashed. The human fleet gathered at Station Omega, a massive orbital platform that served as the Assembly's primary military staging ground, and Tailvos arrived aboard a diplomatic shuttle to begin his duties as liaison. What he found there would forever change his understanding of what it meant to wage war. He had expected to find chaos, the desperate scrambling of a species preparing to face extinction. But instead, he discovered something far more unsettling. He found humans laughing. The main hangar bay was filled with activity, as crews loaded weapons and supplies onto dozens of vessels. But the atmosphere was nothing like what Tailvos had witnessed in other pre-battle preparations. There was no weeping, no whispered prayers to distant gods, no final messages being recorded for loved ones who might never see their faces again. Instead, he heard music blaring from portable speakers, jokes being shouted across the busy deck, and the constant sound of human voices raised in what could only be described as excitement. Ambassador Tailvos called a cheerful voice, and he turned to find a woman approaching him with an outstretched hand and a bright smile. She wore the uniform of an engineer, her dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes sparkling with an energy that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "I am Dr. Amy Reyes," she said, grasping his hand in a strange human greeting ritual. "Chief Engineer of the carrier Resolute, and I have been assigned to show you around and answer any questions you might have." Tailvos allowed himself to be led through the hangar, his translator struggling to keep up with the constant chatter of the humans around him. He had studied their species extensively, but nothing in his research had prepared him for the reality of being among them. "Dr. Reyes," he said as they walked, "I must confess that I find the mood here somewhat confusing. Your species is about to face a Bama that has destroyed entire civilizations, yet your people seem almost happy about it." Dr. Reyes laughed, a sound that Tailvas found oddly pleasant despite his confusion. "Ambassador, we are happy," she replied. "Not because we want to die, but because we finally have a chance to do something that matters. Most of these people have spent their entire careers training for a fight that we all hoped would never come. And now that it has, they are ready." She led him into a massive weapons laboratory, where dozens of technicians worked on devices that Tailvas could not immediately identify. The room hummed with energy, and the air itself seemed to crackle with potential violence. "Let me show you what we have been working on," Dr. Reyes said, and she guided him to a table where a sleek missile rested on a display cradle. It was perhaps 2 meters long, and unremarkable in appearance, but something about it made Tailvas deeply uncomfortable. "We call them Hellfire missiles," the engineer explained, her tone becoming almost reverent. "Each warhead contains a compressed antimatter payload surrounded by a uranium-tungsten shell. Upon detonation, the antimatter reaction triggers a directed nuclear cascade that propels the shell fragments at approximately 70% of light speed." Tailvas stared at the weapon, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. That is, he paused, searching for the appropriate word in the human language, excessive. Dr. Reyes grinned, and there was something almost feral in her expression. "We have another saying on Earth, Ambassador. If it is worth doing, it is worth overdoing." She led him through the rest of the facility, showing him weapon after weapon, each more devastating than the last. There were kinetic impactors designed to punch through the thickest armor, biological agents tailored to specific enemy physiology, electronic warfare systems that could reduce a ship's computer to useless slag. And there were the humans themselves. Tailvas watched them work, noting the casual efficiency with which they handled instruments of mass destruction. A young woman calibrated a targeting system while humming a cheerful tune. An elderly man tested explosive compounds while chatting about his grandchildren. And a group of soldiers cleaned their rifles while debating the merits of something called pizza. "Do your people not fear death?" Tailvas finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. Dr. Reyes considered the question for a moment, her expression becoming thoughtful. "Of course we fear death," she replied. "Every living thing fears death, Ambassador. That is simply the nature of existence. But humans have learned to transform that fear into something else, something useful." "What do you mean?" "We mean that fear does not control us," said a new voice, and Tailvas turned to find a young man approaching them. He wore the flight suit of a combat pilot, his name tag identifying him as Lieutenant Marcus Webb. "May I?" the pilot asked Dr. Reyes, who nodded and stepped aside. Lieutenant Webb could not have been more than 25 years old, his face still holding the softness of youth, despite the hardness in his eyes. He was exactly the kind of soldier that Tailvos had always imagined would be the first to break under the pressure of real combat. "Ambassador, let me tell you a story," the young man said. "My great-great-grandfather fought in something called the Battle of the Bulge. It was a war on our homeworld, long before we reached the stars, and his unit was surrounded by enemy forces in the dead of winter." He paused, his eyes taking on a distant quality, as if he could see that long-ago battlefield. They were outnumbered, outgunned, freezing to death in the snow, and running out of ammunition. The enemy commander sent a message demanding their surrender, promising that they would be treated well if they laid down their weapons. "What did they do?" Tailvas asked, genuinely curious. Lieutenant Webb smiled, and it was the same fierce, predatory expression that Tailvas had seen on Commander Price's face. "My great-great-grandfather's commanding officer sent back a one-word reply. Nuts." Tailvas blinked, confused by the apparent non-sequitur. "I do not understand." "It means they told the enemy to go to hell," Lieutenant Webb explained. "They refused to surrender, even though everyone knew they would probably die. They held their ground for weeks, fighting with everything they had, until reinforcements finally broke through and saved them." The pilot stepped closer, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. "That is what it means to be human, Ambassador. We do not surrender, we do not give up, and we do not stop fighting until the battle is won or we are all dead. The Vorak think they understand war, but they have never faced an enemy like us." Tailvos spent the next several days observing the human preparations, and with each passing hour, his understanding of the species deepened. He watched training exercises where pilots pushed their craft to the breaking point, performing maneuvers that should have been impossible, and laughing when they succeeded against all odds. He sat in on strategy sessions where Admiral Cole outlined plans that seemed like madness, using human ships as bait to draw the enemy into carefully prepared kill zones, sacrificing small forces to destroy larger ones, and employing deception and misdirection in ways that no honorable species would consider. "Is this not dishonorable?" Tailvas asked Captain Lisa Nguyen during one such session. "Your strategies rely heavily on trickery and deception." The captain turned to face him, and her expression was not angry, but patient, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. "Ambassador, honor is a luxury that we cannot afford when facing an enemy that eats civilians," she said. "The Vorak do not take prisoners, they do not accept surrender, and they do not spare the innocent. They are not soldiers, they are monsters, and we will use every tool at our disposal to destroy them. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with an intensity that made Tailvos want to look away. You ask if our methods are dishonorable, but let me ask you this. Is it honorable to let billions die because we were too proud to fight dirty? Tailvos had no answer. On the final night before the fleet departed for the Sentinel Nebula, where the first major engagement was expected to take place, Tailvos found himself standing alone on an observation deck, watching the stars and wondering if he would survive the coming battle. "Beautiful, is it not?" said a voice behind him, and he turned to find Admiral Nathan Cole approaching. The old warrior moved with the easy grace of someone who had long ago made peace with his own mortality. "I have always found the stars to be a source of comfort," Tailvos admitted. "They remind me that the universe is vast and ancient, and that my own troubles are small in comparison." Admiral Cole nodded, coming to stand beside him at the viewing window. "Humans feel the same way," he said. "We look at the stars and we feel wonder and hope and a desperate need to explore what lies beyond the next horizon. It is that need that drove us into space, and it is that need that will drive us to victory against the Vorok." "How can you be so certain?" Tailvos asked. The Admiral was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant points of light. "Because the alternative is unacceptable," he finally replied. "The Vorok want to consume everything we love, everything we have built, everything we dream of becoming. They want to turn the entire galaxy into nothing but food for their endless hunger." He turned to face Tailvos, and in his eyes burned a fire that seemed older than humanity itself. "We will not let them." The Vorok Vanguard emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sentinel Nebula, and Tailvos felt his heart stop as he watched the sensor displays aboard the command ship Defiance. 1,200 hive ships hung against the backdrop of swirling cosmic gases, their organic hulls pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence that spoke of hunger and death. Each vessel was massive, ranging from cruiser-sized hunter craft to continent-spanning carrier organisms that served as mobile breeding grounds for the Vorok warrior caste. Together they formed an armada that had crushed every defense the galaxy had ever raised against it. Against this overwhelming force stood 43 human ships. Admiral Nathan Cole sat in his command chair, his face betraying nothing as he studied the enemy formation with cold, calculating eyes. Around him, the bridge crew worked with a calm efficiency that seemed impossible given the odds they faced. "Admiral," said the communications officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Dana Brooks, "the Vorok flagship is broadcasting on all frequencies. They are demanding our surrender." "Put it on speakers," Admiral Cole replied. The bridge filled with the harsh clicking and whistling of the Vorok language, filtered through translation software that rendered it into rough but understandable speech. "Prey creatures, you have entered the feeding grounds of the Vorok Dominion. Lay down your weapons and submit to consumption, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will feast upon your living flesh for cycles beyond counting." The message repeated 3 times before falling silent, and Tailvos found himself unable to breathe as he waited for the Admiral's response. Nathan Cole smiled, and it was a smile that held no warmth, no mercy, and no fear. "Lieutenant Brooks, open a channel to the enemy flagship." "Channel open, sir." The Admiral leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the void with absolute certainty. "This is Admiral Nathan Cole of the Earth Defense Coalition. You have entered human-protected space, and you have 30 seconds to reverse course and retreat. Failure to comply will result in your complete annihilation." The Vorok commander's response was immediate. Laughter, a horrible chittering sound that seemed to echo from every speaker on the ship. "Foolish prey," the alien voice replied. "Your threats amuse us. We have consumed civilizations that were old when your species still crawled in the mud. and we will consume you as well. Your fleet is tiny, your weapons are primitive, and your courage is nothing but the desperate bravado of creatures too stupid to know when they are beaten." Admiral Cole's smile widened. "You have been warned." He cut the channel and turned to face his crew, and Tailvas saw something change in the humans around him. The calm efficiency remained, but beneath it now burned something fierce and terrible, a hunger that seemed almost to match that of the enemy they faced. "All ships, this is Admiral Cole," the commander announced over the fleet-wide channel. "The Vorak have declined our generous offer to let them flee. You know what that means." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was hard as steel. "Show them why they should have run." What followed was not a battle in any sense that Tailvas understood. It was a demonstration, a lesson written in fire and blood and the screaming of dying aliens. Captain Lee Sun-wen led the fighter squadrons forward, and Tailvos watched in horror and amazement as the small craft dove directly into the heart of the Vorak formation. It was suicide. It had to be suicide. No tactical doctrine in the galaxy supported such a maneuver. But the humans were not following any doctrine that Tailvos had ever seen. The fighters wove through the enemy fleet in patterns that seemed completely random, changing direction without warning and accelerating past limits that should have reduced their pilots to paste. The Vorak targeting systems, designed to track logical evasion patterns, could not compensate for what the humans were doing. "What is that maneuver?" Tailvas demanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Captain Gwen calls it the Gwen Spiral," Admiral Cole replied, without looking away from the tactical display. "It is based on something called chaos theory. The flight patterns are not random, but they are so complex that they appear random to any tracking system not specifically designed to anticipate them." The fighters reached optimal range and released their payloads, and Tailvas watched as dozens of Vorak ships vanished in cascading explosions. The Hellfire missiles did exactly what Dr. Reyes had promised. Their antimatter warheads triggering chain reactions that ripped through the organic hulls like fire through dry grass. They adapted quickly, adjusting their formations and bringing their own weapons to bear, and human ships began to die. Tailvas saw the destroyer Relentless take a direct hit from a Vorak biocannon, its shields failing under the onslaught of corrosive organic matter. The ship listed badly, fire erupting from a dozen breaches in its hull. "Relentless is reporting critical damage," Lieutenant Brooks announced, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Commander Scott Murphy is requesting permission to withdraw." Admiral Cole shook his head slowly. "Tell Commander Murphy that I understand," he said quietly. There was a moment of silence, and then Lieutenant Brooks spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Commander Murphy acknowledges, sir. He says, for the fallen." On the tactical display, the Relentless turned toward the densest concentration of enemy ships and accelerated to maximum thrust. Tailvos watched in stunned disbelief as the crippled destroyer plowed directly into a Vorak carrier, its reactor core detonating at the moment of impact. The explosion was visible without magnification, a brilliant flash of light that consumed not just the Relentless and its target, but 17 other enemy vessels caught in the blast radius. "Did he just—" Tailvos could not finish the sentence. "He did," Admiral Cole replied, and there was no grief in his voice, only pride. Commander Murphy knew his ship was lost. He chose to make his death mean something. The battle raged for hours, and Tailvos watched as the humans employed tactics that ranged from brilliantly innovative to utterly insane. A squadron of bombers used a dense asteroid field as cover, luring Vorak pursuit craft into carefully placed minefields, while a pair of frigates deliberately allowed themselves to be captured by a Vorak boarding party, only to detonate their reactors once enough enemy warriors were aboard. Lieutenant Marcus Webb flew his fighter with a recklessness that should have gotten him killed a dozen times over, but somehow he survived every engagement, his kill count climbing higher with each passing hour. Tailvos heard him laughing over the combat frequency, actually laughing as he weaved through enemy fire and sent Vorak ships spiraling into oblivion. "Is he mad?" Tailvas asked. "Probably," Captain Wynn replied over the command channel, and Tailvas could hear the smile in her voice. "But he is our kind of mad." The turning point came when the Vorak commander finally realized that this was not a battle he could win through attrition. The humans were too unpredictable, too willing to sacrifice themselves, and far too dangerous to be dismissed as mere prey. He ordered a tactical withdrawal, pulling his remaining ships back toward the nebula's edge. But Admiral Cole had anticipated this. A hidden squadron of human vessels emerged from the nebula itself, their engines modified to operate within the dense gas clouds, and they fell upon the retreating enemy with savage fury. When the battle finally ended, 800 Vorak ships had been destroyed, reduced to expanding clouds of debris and biological matter. The humans had lost 26 vessels and 412 personnel. Tailvas stood on the bridge of the Defiance as the final casualty reports came in, and he found himself struggling to process what he had witnessed. The Vorak had never been defeated like this, not in 4,000 years of conquest, and yet a species that had barely discovered fire a few thousand years ago had shattered their vanguard in a single engagement. "Admiral," he said, his voice hoarse, "how did you do this?" Nathan Cole turned to face him, and for the first time, Tailvas saw exhaustion in the old warrior's eyes. The battle had taken its toll, even on him. "Do you want the technical answer or the honest one?" the Admiral asked. "The honest one." Cole was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his words were heavy with a weight that Tailvas could not fully comprehend. "Ambassador, for most of galactic history, war has been a negotiation by other means, a way to shift borders, establish dominance, force treaties and concessions. The species of the Assembly have been playing a game. A deadly game, perhaps, but a game nonetheless." He gestured toward the tactical display, where the debris of the Vorak fleet still drifted. "Humans do not play games," he continued. "When we go to war, we go to end things. We do not fight for territory or pride or political advantage. We fight to destroy our enemies so completely that they can never threaten us again." His eyes met Tailvas's, and the ambassador saw something in those human eyes that he had never encountered in 200 years of diplomacy. Absolute, unwavering conviction. The Vorak thought they understood war, but they only understood hunting. They have never faced an enemy that was willing to match their ferocity, their cruelty, and their total commitment to victory. Admiral Cole smiled grimly. Now they have. The news of the human victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and for the first time in memory, species that had lived in terror of the Vorak began to hope. The monsters could be beaten, the darkness could be pushed back, and maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had finally found its champions. But Tailvas knew that this was only the beginning. The Vorak vanguard had been destroyed, but their main fleet still numbered in the tens of thousands, and they would not make the same mistakes twice. As the human fleet prepared to move on, Tailvas found himself standing at the observation window once again, watching the stars and wondering what new horrors the war would bring. He had witnessed something remarkable today, something that gave him hope for the future. But he had also glimpsed something else, something that lurked beneath the surface of humanity's cheerful courage and tactical brilliance. He had seen what humans became when they went to war, and that vision filled him with a fear that had nothing to do with the Vorak. The war ground on for 3 years, and Tailvas watched as humanity transformed itself into something the galaxy had never seen before. Every human world became a factory of war, every citizen a potential soldier, and every resource was bent toward a single purpose, the complete destruction of the Vorak dominion. He traveled with the human forces as they pushed deeper into enemy territory, liberating conquered worlds, and engaging Vorak fleets in battles that grew larger and more desperate with each passing month. The Vorak adapted, learning from their initial defeats, and they threw more ships, more soldiers, and more resources into the conflict than any species had ever faced before. But the humans adapted too, and their adaptations were terrifying. Sergeant Chris Ortega was a ground forces commander, a hard-faced man in his 30s who had fought on 17 different worlds since the war began. Tailvos accompanied his unit during the assault on Pelethy 6, a planet that had been under Vorak occupation for nearly 2 years. "Ambassador, you should stay on the ship," Sergeant Ortega said as the landing craft descended through the planet's atmosphere. "What we are about to do is not something you will want to witness." Tailvos refused, driven by a need to understand that he could not explain. He had come too far to turn back now, and he needed to see what the humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. The surface of Pelethy 6 was a nightmare. The Vorak had converted the once beautiful world into a breeding ground, covering its continents with hive nests that pulsed with obscene life. Millions of captive Pelethy were being held in organic cocoons, kept alive as a food source for the endless waves of Vorak larvae. Sergeant Ortega's squad numbered only 40 Marines, while the main hive nest held an estimated 12,000 Vorak warriors. By any reasonable calculation, the mission was impossible. But the humans had not come to fight a reasonable battle. Dr. Heather Lawson developed this in 48 hours, Sergeant Ortega explained, holding up a small canister that seemed far too innocuous to be a weapon. "It is a modified nerve agent that specifically targets Vorak pheromone receptors. When released into their atmospheric processors, it will drive them into a blind, self-destructive frenzy." Tailvos stared at the canister, his mind reeling at the implications. "Is this not a war crime?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sergeant Ortega looked at him with eyes that held no trace of the warmth Tailvos had once seen in human faces. "War crimes apply to wars between civilized opponents, Ambassador," he replied. "The Vorak do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate, and they do not spare civilians. They consume everything in their path without mercy or hesitation." He attached the canister to his equipment belt with practiced efficiency. "We are not fighting a war, Ambassador. We are conducting pest control." The operation was brutally effective. Within hours of the agent's release, the Vorak hive nest had torn itself apart, warriors turning on each other in mindless rage as their pheromone-based communication system collapsed. The humans moved through the chaos with surgical precision, eliminating any survivors and freeing the captive Pelethy. But Tailvos could not forget the screams of the dying Vorak, or the cold satisfaction on the faces of the human soldiers as they watched their enemies destroy themselves. The war continued, and the humans developed new strategies that pushed the boundaries of what Tailvos had thought possible. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Diaz, a naval strategist barely 30 years old, created what became known as the Diaz Protocol. "We broadcast false distress signals using captured Vorak communication frequencies," he explained during a strategy briefing. "The enemy hunter packs cannot resist the lure of wounded prey, and they follow the signals into carefully prepared kill zones. When they arrive expecting easy meat, they find antimatter mines and waiting ambush fleets." Tailvos attended dozens of such briefings over the following months, and each one revealed new depths of human cunning. They used captured Vorak warriors as unwitting carriers of tracking devices, allowing human forces to locate hidden hive ships. They seeded enemy supply routes with nanomachines that slowly degraded organic hull material. They even developed biological weapons that specifically targeted Vorak reproductive systems. "How do you think of these things?" Tailvos asked Lieutenant Commander Diaz one evening, unable to contain his morbid curiosity. The young strategist smiled, and there was something almost innocent in his expression, despite the horrors he had designed. "Ambassador, humanity has been finding creative ways to kill each other for thousands of years," he replied. "Our entire history is a record of wars, each one more destructive than the last. We have had a very long time to perfect the art of violence." He shrugged, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. "The Vorok are just the latest enemy on a very long list." The turning point of the war came in the third year, when Captain Kate Morrison volunteered for a mission that everyone knew would be one way. She was the commander of the cruiser Adamant, a vessel that had participated in more engagements than any other ship in the fleet. Her crew had been with her since the beginning, and they had become legendary among both humans and their alien allies. The Vorok primary breeding world is located at the heart of their territory, Admiral Cole explained during the mission briefing. It is the source of their warriors, the center of their reproductive cycle, and the key to their ability to wage war. He paused, his eyes meeting Captain Morrison's across the briefing room. "If we destroy it, the Vorok will lose the ability to replace their losses. Within a generation, they will be too weak to threaten anyone ever again." "What is the plan?" Captain Morrison asked. "We have modified our warp cores to create localized space-time ruptures upon detonation," the Admiral replied. "A strike force will penetrate enemy defenses and deliver these weapons directly to the breeding world's surface. The resulting cascade will destroy the planet entirely." The room was silent as everyone processed what was being asked. The mission required ships to enter the heart of Vorok space, fight through their most heavily defended territory, and then detonate their own reactors in a final act of destruction. There was no possibility of survival. Captain Morrison stood, her face calm and her voice steady. "My crew and I volunteer," she said simply. Tail Voss watched the Adamant and her escort ships depart from Station Omega 3 days later. He had requested permission to view the launch, though he could not explain why he felt compelled to witness it. Captain Morrison's final log entry was recorded for the Assembly archives, and Tail Voss obtained a copy through channels he preferred not to think about. "This is Captain Kate Morrison of the Earth Defense Coalition cruiser Adamant," her voice began, and Tail Voss heard no fear in her words, only a quiet determination that seemed to transcend mortality itself. "We are not doing this for glory, and we are not doing this for revenge. We are doing this because somewhere, on 100 worlds, children are sleeping peacefully tonight, because they know the darkness cannot reach them." Her voice softened, taking on an almost gentle quality. "That is worth any price. That has always been worth any price." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, Tail Voss could hear the smile in her voice. "Tell my family that I love them, and tell Admiral Cole that I will save him a seat." The Morrison maneuver, as it came to be known, succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Captain Morrison and her strike force fought through 3 defensive perimeters, destroying hundreds of enemy vessels in running battles that lasted for days, before finally reaching the primary breeding world. The space-time ruptures created by their modified warp cores were visible across half the galaxy, a cascade of light and fury that consumed the planet and everything on it. 17 billion Vorok perished in an instant, along with Captain Kate Morrison and the 732 men and women who had followed her into the darkness. Tail Voss wept when he heard the news, and he was not ashamed of his tears. He had witnessed many acts of courage during the war, but nothing had prepared him for the magnitude of what Captain Morrison and her crew had done. They had given their lives not for territory or power or pride, but for the simple hope that their sacrifice would make the galaxy a safer place. And in doing so, they had broken the Vorok Dominion forever. The Vorok Dominion surrendered on the 4th anniversary of the war's beginning, and Tail Voss was present when the surviving Queen Mother was brought before Admiral Nathan Cole aboard the command ship Defiance. The great chamber had been cleared of all personnel except essential staff and diplomatic observers. Security was tight, with armed guards stationed at every entrance, and weapon systems primed for immediate response should anything go wrong. Tailvas stood in the shadows near the back of the room, watching as the Vorak Queen Mother was escorted to the center of the chamber. She was ancient beyond reckoning, her chitin cracked and faded to a dull gray, her movements slow and painful as age and defeat weighed upon her massive frame. But her eyes still held the cold hunger of a predator, and Tailvas felt a shiver run through him as those alien orbs swept across the assembled humans. Admiral Cole rose from his seat and walked forward to stand before the fallen monarch. He looked older than Tailvas remembered, the years of war having carved deep lines into his face and turned his hair completely white. But his bearing remained that of a man who had never known defeat. "Your dominion is broken," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "Your fleets are destroyed, your breeding worlds are ash, and your warriors die in greater numbers with each passing day. You have come to surrender, and I have come to accept." The Queen Mother's translator rendered her response into harsh, clicking speech. "How?" she demanded, her voice filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You are young, you are few, and you should have been nothing more than food for our larvae. How did you do this?" Admiral Cole studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "A long time ago, on our homeworld, there was a species of animal called a wolf. They were predators, hunters that worked together in packs to bring down prey much larger than themselves." He began to pace slowly before the Queen Mother, his hands clasped behind his back. "Humanity feared the wolves at first. We saw them as threats to our children and our livestock, and we hunted them mercilessly, driving them to the edge of extinction. But as we learned more about them, we discovered something remarkable." He stopped and turned to face her directly. "The wolf does not fight for territory or dominance. The wolf fights for its pack, for its cubs, for the family unit that means more to it than its own survival. When you threaten a wolf's family, it becomes something truly dangerous." The Queen Mother's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. "You threatened our family," Admiral Cole continued, and his voice grew hard. "You threatened our children, our parents, our friends and lovers, and everyone we hold dear. You broadcast the destruction of innocent worlds as a warning, as a demonstration of your power." He leaned forward until his face was mere inches from hers. "You should have known better. We are not prey, and we are not even predators in the way you understand the term. We are something your species has never encountered before, something that the galaxy itself had forgotten could exist." "What are you?" the Queen Mother asked, and for the first time, Tailvos heard something like fear in her alien voice. Admiral Cole straightened, and when he spoke, his words seemed to carry the weight of all humanity behind them. "We are human," he replied, "and when you threaten what we love, we become something the universe has learned to fear. We become the darkness that hunts the darkness, the nightmare that monsters dream about, the end of all things for those who dare to harm our own." He gestured to the guards, and they moved forward to take the Queen Mother away. "Your species will survive," he said as she was led toward the door. "We are not monsters, whatever you may think of us, but you will never again possess the power to threaten anyone. And if you ever try to rebuild what you have lost, we will return." The Queen Mother paused at the threshold, turning her ancient head to look back at the Admiral one final time. "We ruled this galaxy for 4,000 years, she said. "We consumed civilizations that were old when your ancestors were still learning to walk upright. And yet, you defeated us in 4 years." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. "What manner of creatures are you?" Admiral Cole smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "We are the answer to a question the galaxy forgot to ask," he replied. We are what happens when a species decides that survival is not enough, that there must be something worth surviving for. We are human, and we will be here long after your dominion is nothing but dust and memory. The Queen Mother was led away, and the chambers slowly emptied as personnel returned to their duties. The war was over, but there was still much work to be done. Tailvas remained where he was, lost in thought as he tried to process everything he had witnessed over the past 4 years. He had come to humanity as a skeptic, expecting to witness their noble but futile last stand against an overwhelming enemy. Instead, he had witnessed something that defied everything he thought he knew about the nature of war and the limits of courage. 3 months later, Tailvas submitted his final report to the Galactic Assembly. He had been asked to summarize humanity's nature for the historical archives, to explain to future generations what kind of species had saved the galaxy from the Vorak dominion. He spent weeks attempting to capture what he had witnessed, filling data storage devices with observations and analyses and philosophical musings. He consulted with experts in psychology and military theory and xenoanthropology, searching for the words that would convey the truth of what humanity was. In the end, he deleted everything he had written and started over. His final report was simple, direct, and would be studied by scholars for centuries to come. "I have walked among humans for 4 years," he wrote. "I have seen them laugh and love and create art of staggering beauty. They write poetry that makes my heart ache with longing. They compose music that speaks to emotions I did not know I possessed. And they dream of peaceful stars where all species can live together in harmony. They raise their children with tenderness and care, teaching them to be kind and generous and brave. They form friendships that cross species barriers as if such things were meaningless. And they love with a passion that seems to burn brighter than the stars themselves. But I have also seen them march to war. When the call came, they did not hesitate. Farmers became soldiers. Teachers became tacticians. Poets became killers. They transformed themselves with a speed and totality that defies explanation, becoming something entirely different from the gentle beings I had first encountered. I watched them develop weapons of terrible power and use them without mercy. I watched them sacrifice themselves in numbers that would have broken any other species. I watched them fight with a ferocity that made the Vorak look tame by comparison. The assembly asked me to explain what humanity is, and I can offer only this answer. They are the species that other species tell horror stories about. They are the monsters that hunt monsters, the darkness that the darkness fears. When they decide that something must be destroyed, they will burn the very heavens to ash to ensure it is done. The Vorak were not merely defeated. They were unmade, broken so completely that they will never again pose a threat to anyone. And yet, when the war ended, the humans did not gloat or celebrate their victory with cruelty. They helped rebuild the worlds that had been destroyed. They welcomed former enemies into their society, and they returned to their poetry and their music and their dreams of peace. This is what makes them truly terrifying. They can become anything, transform themselves to meet any challenge, and then return to what they were before, as if nothing had happened. Let this report stand as both warning and testament. Humanity is not to be threatened, humanity is not to be provoked, and humanity is to be befriended, embraced, and welcomed into the galactic community with open arms. For in the vast and ancient cosmos, where empires rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore, only one truth now stands eternal. When humans march to war, the stars themselves hold their breath and pray. Tailvas lived for another 300 years, serving as humanity's greatest advocate in the Galactic Assembly. He watched them spread across the galaxy, building colonies and making friends, and slowly transforming the cosmos into something better than it had been before. He never forgot what he had witnessed during the war, and he made sure that no one else forgot either. His report was required reading for every diplomat, every military officer, and every leader who sought to understand the strange bipedal species that had come from a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy. And when young beings asked him why the stars seemed to shudder when humanity was mentioned, he would smile and tell them the story of the HFY War. Because, he would say, they remember what happened the last time someone threatened the humans. And they are very, very grateful that they are on humanity's good side.